Hello and welcome to Quilting with Lori. This week I'm going to be presenting to you week 31 of my Scrappy Block series. It's a 52-week series. This is also part 2 of my mystery quilt, which is Stars in My Eyes. You see a bit of it on the design wall behind me. This is block number 31. I need to turn it around for you. Beautiful little block, very fun to do. And so I'm going to show you today how to get this done. I'm hoping to get this video edited and loaded onto my YouTube channel by Sunday afternoon so that those of you who are in my mystery quilt class have a chance to view it before Monday night's Zoom class. With all of my mystery quilt classes, the purpose of them is to teach you how to use your scrap stash. The same holds true with my 52-week series of Scrappy Blocks. I'm trying to teach you how you can use your scraps from your very own stash to make beautiful quilts. So today I'm going to share with you how to make this block, but we're going to do it, we're going to think a little bit outside the box. There's a couple of ways to skin a cat, they say. So I want to share with you another way to make this block. I want to put everything on the tabletop so that you can see it. But I like to just give you alternatives. I like you to study a block, identify its parts and pieces, and figure out ways that you can put that block together, maybe to simplify how it goes together. So let's take a look at how I'm going to put this together. All right, the first thing you'll want to do is locate the PDF, which is in the description box below. And this PDF is going to share with you how to put this block together. And I'm going to take you through that step by step here at the sewing machine. And so you'll know how to do that. And you'll also see how to put the rows together. And we're going to be putting together the blocks from last week, as well as the 4 blocks that we'll be creating this week. So today we just have these 4 and the 9 blocks that were from last week are right here. Let me pull that here for you. So last week we made the part 1 of the Stars in My Eyes, and here are 2 different samples. This is the Scrappy block using yardage. If you don't have a scrap stash with all of my mystery quilts, you can, on any of my Scrappy quilts, you can actually make them just using yardage. You're using a light, a medium, and a dark, and that's what I've done on this block here. In the Scrappy block, I have used lights, mediums, and darks as well, but these came from my scrap stash. I pulled squares from my stash, and you've seen me do that numerous times where I have everything in tubs. They're all identified by size and value, and then I pull out what I need for each block. So last week when we made these blocks, and you need to make 9 of them for this wall quilt, we did it using half square triangle techniques, using our Speedy Solutions squares. So every single square, actually 12 of them are half square triangles within this block, and there are just 4 corner blocks that are just 3.5-inch squares. But all of the half square triangles were made with either a light and a dark, or a light and a medium. And once they were created, they were trimmed to 3.5 inches, and the block was put together. Same holds true with this Scrappy one here. So today, we are going to make this block, and you could literally make this entire block with nothing but half square triangles. This could be a half square triangle, that could be a half square triangle. So there could be 4 half square triangles here, and 4 half square triangles there, and 4 half square triangles here, and 4 half square triangles there. So you could do that. But I'm thinking outside the box, and today I'm going to teach you another technique, and I think it's an easier technique for putting these together. We're going to put this row 1 and row 4 together. I guess for you, this would be row 1 and this would be row 4, as you are looking at this video. But we're going to make it as a unit, and we're going to cut and use triangles. So our squares are going to be cut on the diagonal once, and for this row here, it's going to be a small triangle, a large triangle that's light, dark, light, medium, light, dark. And they're going to be put together, and you'll see the sizes that we're going to be cutting here in just a minute. And the same holds true with this, and it's just that we're flipping it around. And here, we're going to make a center square. It's basically a square and a square. We're going to start out with the light square in the middle, and we're going to cut dark squares on the diagonal once and sew them to the opposite sides, and then trim it up to 6.5 inches. Then we're going to make 2 flying geese units. And again, we're going to have these medium squares that we're going to cut on the diagonal once, these light squares that we're going to cut on the diagonal once, and they're going to be sewing the light ones on to the mediums to create 2 flying geese units. So row 2 and 3, basically it's this square and a square, as well as these flying geese units. So really very simple to put together. So let me show you how that's done. You can make this quilt in yardage with lights, mediums, and darks, or you can simply pull scrap squares from your stash in the lights, mediums, and darks in the appropriate sizes. If you are using yardage, you'll just want to cut the appropriate size from the value that's indicated in the PDF. Be sure to pull that PDF. So this one was done using yardage. That's a sample block that I'll show you right now. Let me show you what I have pulled for the scraps. This all was pulled from my scrap stash. For this one, I had to cut the squares to the appropriate sizes. So first of all, I pulled 4-inch lights from my stash, and everything that I pulled is to accomplish all 4 blocks. We're making 4 of these blocks in our mystery quilt today. So these 4-inch squares are going to be cut once on the diagonal, and they're going to help finish these flying geese units. So that's what they'll be used for. So there are 8 of them, and that will take care of all 4 blocks, and we need 8 4-inch lights. We also need 4 of the 5-inch lights, which is what I pulled, and I just trimmed 2 sides so that it measured 4 3/4 inches. They will be the 4 centers of our blocks, and you only need 4 of them because we're only making 4 blocks. So follow the instructions on that. These right here are 5-inch squares. I pulled 8 5-inch lights, and again, these are going to be cut on the diagonal, and they will be used to create these row units here, the triangles for the row units. And these are the mediums. These are 5-inch mediums. There's 8 of them, and they will be used to create the flying geese units as well as the row units. So that's where the mediums will be used. And here I have 4-inch darks, and I have a total of 16 of them. They will all be cut once on the diagonal, and they will be used on each of these corners for the row units. They will also square off the square and a square center. So that's what they'll be used for. So that's what I have pulled for the blocks themselves. And you'll see underneath here I do have some of my corner squares. I've got 4 light corner squares and 8 light setting squares that I cut from some fat quarters. And these are 13-inch. These started out as 13-inch squares, cut once on the diagonal to create a total of 8 setting triangles. And these are the corner triangles. These were 9-inch squares, cut once on the diagonal to create 4 of the corner squares. And you'll see how all of this goes together when I get to that point. First, we are going to start with the Scrappy block. So let's go to the sewing machine. I told you I'd start on the Scrappy block first, but actually I had this one laid out here, so we'll go ahead and show you how to put this together with the yardage fabric, which I cut into the appropriate sized squares based upon light, medium, and dark. And so I'm going to start with the center square. That's what the pattern indicates, to start with this. And what I have done is folded the square in half and in quarters and pressed creases in the center of the square. I've also pressed a crease in the center of the triangles. That way I can match up the creases with from the triangle to the square, and that way we'll have those attached properly. So I'm going to start with opposite sides. So we'll start with this one, match up the creases, and then we'll also attach this one, match up the creases. And so I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides, flip them open, press them, and then I will attach these two. It's basically a square and a square. So let me sew that for you. So I've sewn the two triangles onto the opposite sides, and I like to go ahead and eliminate these dog ears right away. It just helps to get rid of bulk in your seam allowances, and you can simply just cut it even with that square. That's That's simply what I'm doing there. And that will be gone. So now I'm going to take the opposite two triangles, line up those creases in the centers of the square and the triangles, and get those sewn on. Once that's sewn on each side, I'll press them open. Right now I've just finger pressed them, but I'm pressing them to the dark. And then I'm going to square up this square and a square to 6.5 inches. So the 6.5 inch square and a square unit is finished. I have squared it up to 6.5 inches. Now I'm going to work on these two flying geese units. And I'm simply going to bring my medium scrap upper triangle up here to my sewing machine. I'm going to take the light triangle and flip it upside down onto, right sides together, onto the triangle. So it looks like this. And when it's sewn, it will be attached right there. So I have simply just matched up the bottom edge here and this edge here, and I'm going to start sewing right here, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance down this side. I find that it's much easier to start sewing up here than to try to start sewing down in this point. You'll get that all jammed up inside your sewing machine. So that has been stitched. I can press it with my fingers. So you can press these flying geese units however you'd like. If you want to press them open, that will make a flatter flying geese unit there. You're certainly welcome to do that. I'm finding more and more quilters are actually pressing their seams open anymore. But if you do, make sure that your stitch length is a little shorter so that the seam allowances don't pop when it's being quilted. Otherwise, you can simply press it to one side. You can press it to the dark here, and then the other side will have to be pressed to the light. You'll find as you're working with them, and I'll show you here in just a minute, that one side will get pressed this direction, and then the rest of it will get pressed toward the other light triangle. Now let me show you how I put the other one on. So here is the other triangle right there. I'm going to flip it over again, matching the bottom there. So that bottom is matched, this is matched, and I am going to start sewing up here. I'll probably flip it over so that I can start sewing up there and sew all the way down 1/4 inch. So this is how you can make flying geese units from your Speedy Solutions scrap stash. So I'm going to show you on the pressing of this. So there's the unit. So you'll notice I pressed this one to the dark, and then the opposite one has to be pressed to the light. This is a counterclockwise motion here that I've sewn this. Then you also need to, once it's pressed, square each of these flying geese units to 3.5 inches wide by 6.5 inches long. That's very important. Each and every unit needs to be squared up, 3.5 wide, 6.5 long. All right, so I have my flying geese units made and my center square and a square unit made, and I can simply sew these together, and that makes up for basically row 2 and 3. You could, if you prefer, make this entire block, as I said earlier, out of half square triangles. So you'd have 2 light medium half square triangles, 2 light medium half square triangles, and 4 light dark half square triangles, and then you truly would have a row 2 and a row 3. It's totally up to you. I just want to give you options. There are different ways that you can look at a block and create the block. So this is an option for you. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew those together, but then I'm going to show you how to sew these row units together. So I have my center row ready to go. It's been pressed and squared up to 6.5 inches by 12.5 inches. Now we're going to make these outer row units, and we're going to simply just sew the whole rows together. They're identical, they're just flipped in the opposite directions. I'm going to start with the dark triangle at the end. going to do the same thing that I had done earlier. I'm lining it up right sides together with its neighbor here, making sure that this is even here and that this is even here. And I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance right along there. And I'm going to start up here because, again, if it's very difficult to start sewing at a point like that. So I'm going to start right up here and sew that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Go ahead and just finger press it back, pressing toward the dark. And I am, while I'm thinking about it, just trimming away these dog ears. We don't need all of that excess fabric. All right, so we have that unit done. The next thing we're going to do is line up this medium triangle with the light triangle. And when you place that right sides together, make sure that you allow a 1/4 inch tab down here and a 1/4 inch tab up there. That way when it's sewn on, there will be a nice 1/4 inch area up here for the seam allowance to attach this block into the rest of the blocks. So make sure when you flip them over, just eyeball it and make sure there's a good 1/4 inch down here and a good 1/4 inch dog ear that's hanging over the top. And then sew a 1/4 inch from that point there down to this point here. All right, here it is, pressing it open with my fingers. So we have a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance there. Now we're going to add this next one here. And again, what I want to do is make sure that I've got a nice 1/4 inch point there and a good 1/4 inch point down here. And I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance along there. And we'll press it open. And that allows us to have a nice 1/4 inch above these points. That's so important that there's a 1/4 inch above the points, because you don't want to be sewing the seam allowances as you're adding this to the block or to the next block and lose your points. You don't want to lose your points. All right, then the last thing we have to do here is to attach our last green triangle. And with this one, we're simply going to match up the bottom here and the side here. And we're going to go ahead and finish out the row with this. It squares it up is what it's doing. So again, we're going to line this up here and there, 1/4 inch hanging over here, and these match perfectly. And we're going to start here and sew a 1/4 inch down the row there. So here it is. I'll finger press it. There we go. So you'll make 2 of these. They're identical. This is the one for either row 4 or row 1, and they'll go on both sides, and I have to finish this one yet. But that is simply how they're done. This again will be squared up to 3.5 inches by 12.5 inches. And make sure that they're all squared up. This is squared up to 6.5 inches by 12.5 inches. And that is simply how you can put these row units together. Again, if you would prefer to make these with nothing but half square triangles, you could absolutely do that. This would be a dark light half square triangle. Here you'd have a medium light half square triangle, another medium light half square triangle, and last of all, another dark light half square triangle. So you could have 4 half square triangles here if you would prefer that method of putting this block together. Row 1 and row 4 are row units where I've sewn triangles to triangles to triangles. Very simple to do, and again, triangles to triangles to triangles. There is a lot of bias that you're working with. So if you don't like that method, if that's something that you find a little bit more difficult, you might want to go ahead then with half square triangles all the way through the whole block. And then of course this is row 2 and 3, which is constructed of a square and a square and then 2 flying geese units. And again, this could also be nothing but half square triangles. So it's just another option for you. I hope you'll try it this way. I have given instructions in the PDF. If you choose to just go with half square triangles for the whole thing, you're certainly welcome to do that. This is your quilt. Have fun with it. I need to make 2 more of these, and then I'd like to get them on the design wall so that you can see what they look like. But right now, I think what I'd like to do is share with you how I started putting the rows together. And on the last page, I do share with you the rows and how they're put together. So if you'll grab your PDF, I've gone ahead and tilted the quilt on point just so that you can more easily identify row number 1 is simply the corner square, or triangle, excuse me. And then row 2 is the setting triangle, block A, setting triangle. Row 3, setting triangle, block A, block B, block A, and a setting triangle. And that's how you continue on down, putting the quilt together when it's set on point like this, or on diagonal rows. So here is the first row, which would have been the corner that I put together, and that was the 9-inch square that we cut once on the diagonal, and that was sewn. I always like to crease my triangles in the center there and then follow that crease to match it to the center point of the blocks that I'm putting with. Unfortunately for this particular quilt, these blocks do have a center point here, so these can be matched up beautifully. So that was put on there and sewn down, and then step number 2 is to put the setting triangle, match it up with A, and that simply is matched up beautifully here. You're going to have some fabric hanging off up here in a dog ear, which was trimmed away, and once that was sewn, that was pressed over, and then the second setting triangle, you're going to lay it across here and stitch the 1/4 inch seam allowance. And again, there was a point here which I trimmed away. I see that I didn't trim away this. I'm going to go ahead and trim that away too. We don't need that in there. It's always nice to get rid of dog ears that you don't need, any extra fabric that you can get rid of. So that's how I've sewn row 2. And then row 3, we would do the same thing. We would add a corner square, or corner triangle, excuse me, I keep calling them squares. Add that to block A, and then A to B, B to A to B, B to A, and then another corner on the end. And then this row would have 3 of the blocks and the setting triangles, and the last row would be similar to this one here, where there's a setting triangle, block A, setting triangle, and then the very last row is simply another corner triangle. So on the design wall here, you'll see I've got a number of the blocks up here. I do have 2 of the blocks from today's class in the center there. I do need to make 2 more of them for these 2 spots here. And I'm starting to lay it out and get it sewn together. I'm hoping to have this completely done, the center of the quilt, by Monday night's class, so that you'll actually be able to see what it looks like. And I want to get started on my Scrappy blocks too, so that my Scrappy mystery quilt will be done for you, or at least a good start on that. I always make 2 different mystery quilts each time I do a mystery quilt. One of them I'll use yardage for those of you who do not have scraps, and then you can see how mystery quilts can be done just simply using light, medium, and dark yardage from your favorite line of fabrics. And then I also will always do a Scrappy quilt as well of my mystery quilts. And this one is Stars in My Eyes. I hope you like it. I'm enjoying it. It's going to be a really fun one. I can't wait till next week when you see the border. We're going to be doing a pieced border next week. So this is my block for week 31 of my 52-week series of my Scrappy blocks. So I hope you're enjoying those, and I have many more coming for you. And this is also part 2 of my Spring 2023 Mystery Quilt class. And like I had mentioned earlier, we'll have our Zoom class on Monday night. I hope to have this center of this quilt finished, pieced on the wall, and have a good start on my Scrappy blocks as well, so that you can get an idea of what they both look like. And I do have my Facebook page, which is Quilting with Lori. Go out to either my Mystery Quilt group or my Scrap Up Your Stash group. Please post pictures of your blocks, of your quilts, things that you're working on. Everyone loves to be inspired by others and the projects that they're working on. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. This is Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman. And please don't forget to stop in next week. We're going to be working on the borders for this quilt. It's going to be pieced borders where you can use your scrap stash and actually cut the pieces that are required for a beautiful pieced border for this quilt. So until next week, happy quilting. Please be sure to like, subscribe, share the video with your friends. Let others know about the quilts and the blocks that you're making from my channel. Hope you enjoyed it. Happy quilting. See you next Monday.